Ladies and gentlemen, we now arrive at that point where we have a debate. The motion before us is that good governance is mainly about laws and regulations. Good governance is mainly about laws and regulations. Now, throughout the world, in many debates, the underlying question is good governance mainly about laws and regulations. If you look at the leading countries in the world, and it's not hard to imagine which ones they are. You have a major country whose whole ethos is that it's all about laws and regulations. And you have another country which says laws and regulations are important, but the rule of strong men, in most cases, is even more important. And there is this debate going on all over the world as to whether we should be talking about laws and regulations or whether we should be talking about strong, decisive leadership. Now, usually we would have 4 debaters, but a debate is hard to persuade people to take part in. So a round of applause for 2 very brave, in this case, men. Debating for the motion, which is arguing that good governance is indeed mainly based on laws and regulations, is Professor David Grayson, who needs no introduction. He is well known to all of us as an Emeritus professor, author, and thought leader on corporate responsibility. Debating against the motion, which is that good governance is not mainly about laws and regulations. You have Mr. Edgar Chua, former chairman of Shell Philippines, current chairman of the influential Makati Business Club. The rules of debate are as follows. Professor Grayson will have 8 minutes opening statements. Ed Chua will have 8 minutes opening statement. Each will then have 5 minutes for rebuttals. Then the debate opens to the floor. About closing time, they will have 3 minutes each for closing statements. When the debate opens to the floor, we do not allow fence sitting. When you raise your hand, you need to say whether you are for or against and give a 1-sentence reason for your position. In the spirit of this debate, we will not allow for comments and fence sitting. So please join the debate, but you need to be succinct in declaring your position and your reason for that position. Now, we will do a poll before the debate, and we will do a poll after the debate. So can we have the pre-debate poll now? So there are 3 positions. Now bear in mind the motion. I agree, I am for the motion, press 1. I disagree, I am against the motion, press 2. I am unsure, I am undecided, press 3. Can you register your opinion now? So I agree that good governance is mainly about laws and regulations, 24%. I disagree, 63.6%. I'm unsure, 12.4%. So 24, 63.6, and 12.4. After the debate, we will do the poll again and see how the positions will have shifted. Now I invite David to give his opening statement.
Timothy, I think the important thing to remember to begin with is we're not talking about governance, we're talking about good governance. So when you set up those two different models, I think you forgot that crucial point. Now, in his remarkable and really inspiring speech yesterday afternoon, talking about the Michai Bamboo School, Michai told us about the philosophy and the curriculum of the school. I'm taking away many exciting ideas from his talk, but there's one thing in particular that he told us yesterday afternoon that stood out for me. He described how he encourages the school children in the Bamboo School to think outside the box, but always within the law. Always within the law. All too often, we take for granted as individuals the importance of operating within the rule of the law. We are here in this forum discussing enterprise for society and the big picture context in which enterprises for society have to operate. Because businesses, like individuals, need clarity, need certainty. They need, in order to be able to operate efficiently and effectively, the rule of law. And our debate is about how that constitutes good governance. Now, there are many different definitions of good governance. So I went to the closest thing we have to a global authority, the United Nations. And on the website of the United Nations Commission for Human Rights, they define good governance as the process whereby public institutions conduct public affairs, manage public resources, and guarantee the realization of human rights in a manner essentially free of abuse and corruption and with due regard to the rule of law. The true test, they say, of good governance is the degree to which it delivers on the promise of human rights, civil, cultural, economic, political, and social rights. Rights which are enshrined in law. The UN Commission makes clear there are, of course, many different facets, dimensions of good governance: effective participation, multi-actor partnerships, political pluralism, transparent and accountable processes and institutions, an efficient and effective public sector, legitimacy, access to knowledge, information and education, political empowerment of people, equity, sustainability, attitudes and values that foster responsibility, solidarity and tolerance. But the base, the foundation, they say, is rules and regulations. Laws and regulations, the rule of law. That is why we say good governance is mainly about laws and regulations. The rule of law is the bedrock, the foundation on which good governance then is built up. And of course it should go without saying, good governance means laws and regulations fairly and consistently implemented without fear or favour by an independent judiciary. It's no coincidence, Mr. Chairman, that the ease of doing business ranking from the World Bank relies so heavily on the regulatory environment in each country. It's no coincidence that the annual Transparency International Index of Corruption gives so much emphasis to whether countries are applying laws and regulations to tackle corruption or not. Now, I'm always very interested in the work of the World Economic Forum. And a decade ago now, they produced an important report, Partnering to Strengthen Public Governance. It's not a long document, it's well worth a read. And they define in that document weak governance, bad governance, and underdeveloped global governance. Bad governance is characterized, they say, by deep flaws in domestic enabling environment, discriminatory laws and regulations. Weak governance is, of course, by insufficient institutional capacity. Underdeveloped international governance is characterized, they say, by a lack of rules. So, again, laws and regulations. Now, they go on to say and give examples of how companies are tackling these issues. And what's remarkable is how many of those examples involve things like tackling corruption, the voluntary principles on security and human rights, business action to stop counterfeiting and piracy. Again, business actions to help to reinforce laws. Now, the former chairman, or chief executive rather, of Shell, so Ed's former boss, Sir Mark Moody-Stewart, says, as businesses, we cannot and should not try to address poor governance on our own. But we can join in an effort with civil society organisations, with labour unions, with international financial institutions to try to build the governance structures which can address these challenges of weak and poor and underdeveloped governance. So, ladies and gentlemen, my argument is this. It's a business interest and a responsibility to contribute to improving governance. And the foundation, the basis, if you like, of what constitutes good governance is laws and regulations fairly and independently implemented and executed. And of course, it also goes without saying the spirit of the law is crucially important, as well as the actual letter of the law. And you don't need to listen to me. Just follow what the United Nations says, what the World Bank says, what Transparency International says, what Ed's former boss says, and actually recognise that these are critically important issues in terms of laws and regulations as the basis for good governance. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I beg to propose.
Thank you and good afternoon. According to the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, good governance has 8 major characteristics. It is participatory, consensus-oriented, accountable, transparent, responsive, effective and efficient, equitable and inclusive, and follows the rule of law. So indeed, the rule of law is very important. But just to remind everyone, laws and regulations are made by men and women who are mainly politicians. I had a good friend who educated me and said, you know, the word politics comes from 2 words. One is poly, meaning many, and the other one is ticks. These are blood-sucking insects. So then he said, then you can make your conclusion about politicians. Apologies to the politicians in the room. I hope there are not many of them. But if we go back in history and look at laws by even developed countries, there was anti-Jewish legislation during pre-war Germany. This was the law. There was apartheid legislation which institutionalized racial discrimination in South Africa. After the Civil War in the United States, the Southern United States passed the Jim Crow laws that enforced racial segregation, which then gave rise to the civil rights movement in the United States. Even women's suffrage in the United States, the legal right of women to vote was only established over a course of several decades. And it was only in 1920 that it became nationally a law. And even now, we go to different countries and we look at laws which limits freedom of speech, freedom of association. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, a law states that the husband is the head of the household and the wife must obey her husband. I think many men would like that. In Yemen, wives are required to have legitimate intercourse with their husbands when they are fit to do so. They are also required to obey and refrain from leaving their home unless given permission by their husbands. In the United States, children born out of wedlock wishing to obtain U.S. citizenship face different conditions depending on whether they obtain status through the mother or the father. So you can see in all of this that the laws, even now, are not really what we can call inclusive and equitable. If I may quote again the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, a society's well-being depends on ensuring that all its members feel that they have a stake in it and do not feel excluded from the mainstream of society. This requires all groups, but particularly the most vulnerable, to have opportunities to improve or maintain their well-being. The other complexity that's happening right now is that laws and ethics cannot keep pace with technology. Very recently, we have seen this in the case of Facebook, where Mark Zuckerberg had to face Congress and explain. In fact, there was a paper done by Vivek Wada, a fellow at Stanford University who wrote the MIT technology paper. And he made a study and he said, employers can get into legal trouble if they ask interviewees about their religion, sexual preference, or political affiliation. Yet, they can use social media to filter out job applicants based on their beliefs, looks, and habits. They can refuse to give a loan to people whose Facebook friends have bad payment histories if their work histories on LinkedIn don't match their bios on Facebook. So there are regulatory gaps that exist because laws have not kept up with advances in technology. And the gaps are getting wider as technology advances ever more rapidly. You can now, people who buy from Amazon, you will see that your preferences, Amazon keeps giving you feedback in terms of your past purchase history. And there are many, many other things that happen where, for example, self-driving machines, our cell phones, they contain a lot of information. But is this information, private information, something that we're prepared to share? So the laws are not yet there. And this is not just happening during our generation. I understand that, again, according to Mr. Vivek, when he did the study, the printing press in the 1400s was disrupted. Because at that time, before the printing press, knowledge was quite limited. And when the printing press actually came about, it disrupted political and religious elites because it allowed knowledge to spread. The steam engine and the mass production of steel also was disruptive. And the laws on property rights, contract law, etc. only came about after this. So we're seeing more and more of this. And that's why, as far as I believe, it is not enough when we talk about laws and regulations, when we talk of good governance. There are many, many things that needs to be in place. I would agree with the professor that the spirit of the law is very important. But even the spirit of the law, as I said, depending on who crafted the law, in the country where it was crafted, it doesn't necessarily mean that that law is actually following good governance. Because at the end of the day, laws are not about ethics or fairness. Laws are about regulating human behavior. And the examples I gave earlier were all about regulating human behavior. Nothing about good governance, nothing about ethics and fairness. I would end there. Thank you.
Thank you. We move now to rebuttals. 5 minutes, Professor Grayson. 5 minutes, Ed Chua.